Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and today I'm joined by two wonderful people that I've known for several years now, and I want to give you a chance to introduce yourselves.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Henley, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a mom of three beautiful girls and a fourth one on the way.
It's exciting.
Yes, very exciting.
Due in October, I think?
Yeah,
that's
October
wonderful.
18.
Wow.
Yeah.
We'll see. I think you said you're not sure.
We're not finding out the gender this time, so it should be really exciting.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sure you're looking forward to meeting the new little one. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And like I said, I've known Kristen for several years, and she's actually presented at several emotional intelligence summits. And I've been very grateful to hear a lot of the information that she's shared.
And I'm Jackson Henley, husband of Kristen Henley. And we just enjoy spending a lot of our time parenting these three wonderful girls, and fourth question mark on the way. And I'm an ER doctor as well by trade.
So that's what you do in your spare time.
In my spare time, yes. Yeah. Occasionally I do go in and work the ER.
And Jackson actually also presented at this year's Emotional Intelligence Summit, and I really enjoyed your presentation as well. So thank you both for being here today. And today's topic is on relational trauma. And so we're going to be delving into that and getting into some of the nuances of that. Mm-hmm. How did the two of you actually first get interested in that topic of relational trauma?
Well, it's been a part of my profession for quite some time, but I can't say that I fully understood or was able to comprehend the different nuances, as you mentioned, of relational trauma until we actually experienced it ourselves and personally. So we're here to share our story in hopes that it can bring hope to other people who might be struggling or who may have struggled with this topic.
And I really appreciate that. It's one thing to be a professional and have theoretical knowledge about a topic. And of course, we can help people that way. It's a whole nother thing when we go through something personal. Yes. And I think that just adds a whole different perspective and a real richness in a way, even though obviously those experiences can be very difficult. But in a way, it can be a blessing because
absolutely
it can help people from a different way through that as well. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more when you say that you experienced this personally, and maybe Jackson, you can share a little from your perspective there.
Yeah. So, this is never, I don't think this will ever get easy to talk about, but this certainly wasn't our goal in setting out. We didn't decide one day we're going to study this topic. Just to put it bluntly, for a variety of reasons, none of which are excuses, I became heavily addicted to pornography when I was quite young, and obviously having no idea at the time how heavy of an addiction it was, and that lasted for years. Kristen and I, when we were dating and in courtship, it was addressed, and I knew it was wrong. But at the same time, I also had just a huge deficit in my own knowledge of how powerful an addiction could be, and just the ramifications downstream that it can cause. So when it was first addressed, me knowing that it was wrong, you rightfully so saying, this is a deal breaker if you want to continue to pursue what will eventually turn into an engagement and marriage. I more than happily agreed and swore it off. I said, this is never going to be an issue again. I'm done. I'm so sorry. This is years ago, and I being, very immature at the time, I had some things I struggled with at that time, as far as, what she needed to know,
Yeah.
and the depth that we were to address it at the time. But that being said, I said, there's no way I'm doing it ever again. I love you too much. I'm sorry for this. And in my mind, that was that. I was done. And then, like I had said, not really understanding the power of not only just what the addiction was currently doing and it had done to her already, but just the years of wiring of my brain and the years of addiction. That's not something that somebody can just walk away from without a fairly intense life change and a lot of help and resources.
Therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I was just thinking as you were talking, there's a lot of literature actually on the impact of pornography on someone's brain. And like you said, it is a true addiction. I mean, it really is one of those supra dopamine stimuli that excess of dopamine can really impact the brain, so that a lot of people, when they've been introduced to it, especially at an early age, it becomes difficult to even enjoy like the everyday interactions and normal pleasures of life. And that's, I think, why a lot of people probably end up even going back to that. Is that something that you experienced in your own life?
Yeah. And so, the both of us were under the impression that it never would be an issue again. And I guess just to make a long story short, it did become an issue again. I had been clean, as clean as I knew how to be clean, not, intentionally going towards internet pornography, for several years, up until we had been married for, I think it was a year or two into our marriage. That was my first relapse. And I would say, looking back on that, I relapsed and dealt with all the horrible feelings and emotions that an addict who falls off the wagon, so to speak, deals with.
Do you remember if there was like a trigger or something for this relapse or other relapses that you've had? Because sometimes it's helpful for people to understand some of the things that can actually trigger people into relapsing into these unhealthy behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this was also a number of years ago. And so as best I can remember, I mean, and just looking back at when I would just have a relapse or act out, boredom would typically be an issue. Time, being, not having anybody around, maybe even feeling lonely. And at times there were, occasions where there would be some already negative emotions involved, whether it was a rough day at work or school or something like that. And again, growing up, that was how I conditioned myself to respond to stress. These are things that I'm understanding now, years after the fact.
Yeah. Through therapy, we've learned so much from through some assessments that he's been through and through just trauma-focused addiction therapists being able to question him. And I mean, he was in a really stressful time, which was residency. And I think that played an impact. I think we discovered that
was
too.
Definitely a contributing factor.
So stress, loneliness, boredom,
need for escape.
Need for escape. Those are all big factors that you experienced. And I think a lot of other people too, when it comes to any addiction, and, sexual addiction is, I think, no exception. Right.
Absolutely.
So through this process, did you always let Kristen know when you relapsed? And because it sounds like, this is something that you've kind of battled on and off through your marriage for some time. Did you always let Kristen know right away when you relapsed, or how did that go?
Well, I never did. I was ashamed. It would fill me with self-loathing and just contempt for myself, guilt. And in addition to that, I also hadn't realized how good I had been at kind of splitting and keeping secrets, understanding that deep down, I had this actual fear of rejection growing up, much more so than I again ever realized. And I'm only able to articulate this now, because Kristen and I have obviously done a lot of processing with this, and we've gotten professional help too. But yeah, I mean, I just to kind of summarize, over the course of several years, I relapsed every several months, every time convincing myself that time was the last time and that I needed to tell Kristen. Yeah. But I never did, up until one day after years of doing that. And then it finally became what we call our D-Day, our disclosure day.
Yeah. Which is interesting too, that one thing that's been difficult for us to process is that there is a sort of shaping over time that the addict will also convince themselves that so there's minimizing and deflection because the shame is so strong, that there's this creation of an alternate reality, almost as if there's a basement in your home that you don't even want to acknowledge is there. Nobody else knows it's there. But from time to time, you go down in that basement and you maintain this secret world ongoing, which is subliminally affecting your family unconsciously.
Yeah,
it's affecting your intimacy. It's affecting, and one of the things that I think is most unique about our story is we actually had a good above average marriage.
Wow.
I mean,
which is amazing when you think about what was going on,
which
right?
is amazing to think, and why we want our story to be told is because you can have a somewhat seemingly good marriage and where we have this teamship that, don't get me wrong, we weren't perfect by any means, but we had this existence, this really good teamship, that there were times though that there was a lack, I couldn't name it, but there was a lack of cherishing, a lack of attunement, a lack of empathy. And this going back to this shaping piece, that I think even he was creating a different reality for himself, so he didn't have to take responsibility for it.
And that really is interesting, because what I'm hearing is there's really a two-part problem that's going on here. There's, of course, the addiction component, but then there's this alternate reality sort of component or deceptive component. And so it's not just the addiction, but then the addiction, because of the shame and everything attached to that, sets the stage for deception. Is that
absolutely?
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's summed up really well.
One of the most healing aspects for us is having that understanding. I think sometimes, and I can speak as a mental health profession, we miss that second part of the problem and we don't spend enough time there. And couples can't fully heal because they're just focused on the addiction piece, but they're not focused on the integrity problem. And Dr. Omar Menwala, he's a clinical sexologist in LA, and we came across his material through Betrayal Trauma recovery.org. And he was on a podcast and we heard him talking about this two-part problem. And I remember, we haven't talked about D-Day yet, but I just remember bawling through my trauma fog, thinking, this is it. This is the piece we are missing. And the piece that we have to recognize was an incredible deficit in our relationship, which was the integrity. Because there's all sorts of psychological manipulation that took place for him to cover his addiction.
None of which I was aware I was doing at the time.
Exactly.
Aside from, I knew that there was something you didn't know.
Right.
And that I had lied about it.
Yeah. And at times, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've talked about this too, where there was times where his lack of empathy was so strong because of the addiction. Addiction decreases empathy in a person. And so because of his lack of empathy, then he would have these thoughts and kind of condition himself to say, what she doesn't know won't hurt her. So then there's this two-part problem again. So you're not admitting the addiction, but then you also have this piece where she doesn't really need to know. It's only going to hurt her.
And I think that's where a lot of rationalization can come in, for people struggling with addiction, saying, well, I can take care of this myself and get past it. And so it's better just not to burden the other person with this, but that really adds to the deceptive component.
Right.
And, when I think about a relationship, like a healthy, intimate relationship, what's the foundation there? Well, I think it's trust, right?
It's trust, exactly.
And so, the addiction is one issue, which is very important, and that sets the stage. But then if you don't have the trust piece, then it's like, what kind of relationship do you really have?
And that's the shattering that takes place. And that's where betrayal trauma enters, and the most difficult thing about that is just knowing that this person that you have built your life with, that you connected so well with and invested so much time and effort and love and support, et cetera, all those components of healthy intimacy, that they were capable of lying to you and being so good at it for so many years.
And there's a great deal, I'm sure, of trauma, of course, that so that it's difficult for the person that's struggling with the problem, but there's a great deal of trauma for the spouse and for the family. And in part two, this session that we're doing right now is part one of part two of what we're doing with Jackson and Kristen. We're going to focus a little more on what Kristen's experience was and the healing that she has gone through and is still going through. Now, as far as your piece, Jackson, I mean, what would you say through this process? And you were going to talk, I think, about D-Day and what actually even brought you to that point where you got to disclosing actually what was going on. And what kind of happened to lead up to that and then subsequently?
Yeah. So in my mind, now what I see is such a simplistic way of thinking. I knew I was going to have to tell her at some point, and I thought, well, if I can be sober for X amount of time, then it won't hurt as much. And who knows what that amount of time is. For me, in my mind, I was thinking years. I said, I needed to make sure I could swear to her it would never happen again, and that it hasn't happened for years. And so I'll wait. Okay, so it's this year. I'm going to wait, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, and then I'll tell her, and it won't be that bad.
And what was even compelling you to tell her at all?
Well, that's a good question. So I knew that she would want to know.
Okay.
Because I would ask, being a therapist and dealing with this issue from time to time, I would check in. And I remember the last time, I didn't know he lied to me, but he remembers, and he fell into a depression because he was going against his conscience.
Yeah.
And so he had directly looked me point blank in the eye and lied and followed that up essentially by saying, these aren't exact words, but I would never lie to you. That's just a phrase that rings in my ears a lot from our past.
So it just turned into a lie upon a lie. And that hit me really hard because I didn't think at the time that I was a dishonest person, that I was a liar.
In other areas of your life, you had integrity. And
absolutely.
You wouldn't lie.
People would say he's a great guy. He does, nice things. He'll give you the shirt off his back. And this is the kind of image I wanted to portray. While at the same time, the most important earthly relationship I have, what I'm even now realizing is I didn't lie to her. I was lying to her during this entire time because she, for years, is under the impression that this isn't an issue when it was.
Yeah. And shaping my reality over time.
And that speaks a lot to that compartmentalization effect. And also the fact that even when there's one thing that we're doing that we know is wrong and we haven't made that right, we're not going to have peace. Even if every other area of our life is doing fine.
Right.
And it sounds like you had that sense of, okay, I got to come clean here. Otherwise I'm just never going to have peace. So finally you got to that point where you
I think it was a combination of, truthfully, I think the Holy Spirit had a big role in it. I had prayed about it. I had prayed for that burden to be taken from me. But I think prayer and divine intervention can only go so far when you're still actively cherishing a sin, which I was doing by lying to my wife. And so that plus we actually had someone come to our church and give a weekend kind of a seminar over abuse in the church. Her name's Sarah McDougall. She's a great resource. And she had also talked about I forget exactly secrecy
bringing darkness into the light,
Yeah.
exposing darkness,
Yeah.
even the dark corners of our own life,
Right.
to bring it out in the open and deal with things and heal.
So that just, it was a Saturday night. We were sitting on the couch, and she'd even asked me again that night, is there anything I need to know? And I lied again. I said no. And then I said, minutes or an hour later, whenever it was, it's obviously all a blur now. That was just such a hard time. I was like, no, I'm going to tell her. And even that is just so, it's hard to think about, hard to even talk about, but I was under the impression that I'd be in the doghouse for a few weeks, and I still had in my head, the quote, "It's just porn" mentality. Like, it's not like I went out and touched somebody or cheated on her. And then it happened. I told her, and her reality was shattered. Our marriage was shattered. And at first, I was tempted to think she was overreacting, until I started understanding exactly what just happened. She all
and
of a sudden,
especially with the trust.
She didn't know who she was married to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was hard for me to wrap my mind around, but yeah, it was tough.
It was really helpful that God placed in our life the appropriate resources.
Yeah.
And we had a few that we had to just say, I don't think this is your specialty. And shift to trauma-informed therapists who really got this. And we listened a lot, dove into books, and just allowed God to really enter and start some healing. But that was very painful. I mean, years, and it takes a long time.
Yeah. Sometimes I know for myself and a lot of my clients, sometimes there's a lot of pain in those initial steps of healing.
Yeah.
And yet it is so important to be willing to face that pain, to go through it, because on the other side, there is hope, isn't there?
Yeah.
Now, I'd love to hear from you, Jackson. I mean, what were the steps that you've taken since then to actually help address this issue from your side? And again, in part 2 of our episode, we're going to be diving more into Kristen's part and the healing that she's been working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most important thing, or there's so many things, but one of the most important things is just having that understanding of the breach in the trust, and how when you are specifically within a marriage with a spouse, when you are living someone who you feel like you're giving all of yourself to, and you're intimate with, and the ways that spouses are intimate with each other. I'm not just talking about sex, but just in knowing and trusting the person to be there by your side and protect you. When you realize that you have taken that from the person that you love and have, spoken your vows to and shared so much with, that's a pretty, I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Wow.
Multiple times over the course of weeks and months after.
And it's so interesting to hear you share that, because it sounds to me like a big part of the motivation for your healing was actually realizing the impact, the pain that you were causing to someone that you loved, and really getting out of that mode of rationalizing or being in denial about it.
And protecting self.
And,
really, because who are you protecting ultimately?
Yeah.
So since after you realized how much it was really hurting Kristen, and the pain that you were inflicting, and how wrong it really was, what you were doing, what actually led? Because for some people that just might lead to more shame, and then just repeating the cycle. What are the steps that you've actually taken to get beyond that?
Well, I mean, like Kristen was saying, we found a couple of professionals who've been really helpful to, identify the past triggers. Kind of, it's important to take just what we've kind of come to refer to, this fearless moral inventory of one's own life to gain an understanding of just the importance of all the angles. And not that you want to dwell in this pit of despair, but at the same time, this is one of the most important and challenging things a couple will probably ever go through. Again, in various degrees, depending on the kind of relationship that they have. Yeah. And so that plus, we have some friends of ours who have just been lifesavers as well. That was a huge one. They've just become mentors to us. And having basically an accountability partner, not only for the behavior, for the pornography or the acting out or whatever you want to refer to it as, but someone who could pray with you and who could listen without judgment, and just be a support. Yeah. Because there were plenty of times where I thought our marriage was done. I thought we were done. I said, she's hurting too much. I can't imagine her ever getting over this. And I don't know if this is going to work. And nor could I expect her to be a support to me, given the fact that I was the very perpetrator that caused her all this harm.
Yeah. So it sounds like really recognizing that how much pain this has caused and not rationalizing or sweeping it under the rug is really important. Continuing to be transparent with the struggle that you're going through, getting that accountability, getting the support through therapy, both individual and then working as a couple. So, and then of course tapping into resources, whether it's books or podcast videos, whatever it might be.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
So it sounds like it really needs to be a multifaceted approach. And I'm definitely hearing spirituality has played a big role through this as well.
Yeah.
So what would you tell, or what would you say to somebody that might find themselves in a similar situation? What kind of hope could you give them?
Well, there is hope. I mean, if the two things are addressed, the behavior itself and the integrity issues.
So both parts of the problem really need to be addressed.
The two parts of the problem need to be addressed.
I think personally, but also in therapy too, making sure that those are.
At least for me, the addiction thrived in secrecy. I didn't realize once I came clean a second time, that was a very different disclosure. We wanted to leave no stone unturned. We had a lot of late talks. We were very tired for months. I put her through a lot, and recognizing that was crucial in seeing the pain that resulted from the behavior. And then the integrity piece, understanding that while I never set out to become a pathological liar or a chronic deceptive person, there was a very important component there that affected her and her reality and our relationship, our ability to have intimacy, to know each other and to be known by one another. It really compromised that in a bad way.
So it takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of time to rebuild, but it sounds like the work is worth it.
Yes,
and it looks like it's paying off. And I'm so grateful to hear that. And for our listeners, we're going to definitely be providing resources in the show notes so that people can get more direction for help for dealing with these sorts of situations. And Jackson, Kristen, so appreciate you joining us today. It's been a real blessing to hear your story. Thank you for sharing. I know these things aren't easy to talk about, but I know that it's going to do a lot of good for our listeners. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.